On the last couple of episodes of What's All the Fuss About, we've gotten to see some great examples of movies that show us a story rather than tell us a story. Number 96 on AFI's list, Do the Right Thing, so masterfully showed us the racial tensions in this small neighborhood in New York that had earned itself an ultimate recommendation. And of course in the last episode, number 95 on the list, The Last Picture Show, showed us a year in the life in a small, lonely Texas town. And the subject of today's review, number 94 on AFI's Top 100 list, is Pulp Fiction, which does much the same thing. Which is weird to say for a movie that's known pretty much largely for its dialogue. My first experience with Pulp Fiction was not good. It was about 6 or 7 years ago. I was on tour for something, so I was on a tour bus and they decided to pop in Pulp Fiction. Good rule of thumb, tour buses are not good places to experience movies for the first time. At that point I didn't even know the name Quentin Tarantino. All I knew about Pulp Fiction was that it starred John Travolta, Samuel L. Jackson, Uma Thurman, and Bruce Willis, that it was notorious for using the F word an inordinate number of times, and that it had quite a bit of violence and drug use. So I didn't even get past the first story before I decided to stop watching this movie and listen to some music instead. However, even in that first unfinished viewing, when I had watched the scene with Travolta and Jackson in the car driving to this job that they have and having a conversation, I remember thinking to myself, this is some pretty damn good dialogue. And then, of course, years later, I discovered that this was a highly critically acclaimed film, that it had made AFI's Top 100 list, and that it had been parsed and analyzed by film students ever since it came out. And also that the name Quentin Tarantino was a big name in the film world. And so, I was really looking forward to watching this movie again and finding out just what exactly all the fuss is about.
Do you follow me?
Not guilty.
Fight in here. This is the world.
Out, kid.
Why is the run go serious?
You know what they call a quarter pounder with cheese in France?
No.
Tell them, Vincent.
Royale with cheese.
Royale with cheese. You know why they call it that?
Because of the metric system?
Check out the big brain on bread.
This is a movie of words. Practically every review ever done of this movie has said that this is a movie of brilliantly crafted dialogue. But what struck me more than the brilliant craft of the dialogue was how little the dialogue drives the story. The story is not in the dialogue. At least not directly. When the characters talk to each other, they don't necessarily talk about what's going on. They don't talk about the plot. They discuss the differences between the US and Europe. They discuss the sensuality of a foot massage. They discuss the difference between what's pleasing to the eye and what's pleasing to the touch. In other words, they discuss what people in their situation might discuss. In that opening scene, John Travolta and Samuel Jackson are having a conversation in the car. In any other movie like this, they would be talking about the plot. They would be talking about what they're going to do, thereby providing exposition for the audience. But think about it. These guys have done jobs just like this dozens, possibly hundreds of times before. Why would they talk about what they're going to do? They've done it so often, they've got the routine down pat. They don't need to talk about what they're going to go do. So what do they talk about instead? Well, the John Travolta character just got back from Amsterdam, so they talk about the differences between the US and Europe. It just makes sense. It's very natural dialogue. And I think that pretty much defines the dialogue. It might not be relevant to what's going on at the time, but it makes sense. It's what people would be talking about. So what's all the fuss about? What exactly does the dialogue do for the story if it doesn't necessarily focus on the plot? What the dialogue does for this story is it establishes character and atmosphere. In the opening few minutes of the film, we learn more about these characters than we would learn if the dialogue had been entirely plot-driven. And yet, for all that, elements of the plot are still allowed to sneak in, just subtly enough so that we can get them, but not so obvious that it becomes clear that this is a plot-driven narrative. And really, this isn't a plot-driven narrative, it's a character-driven narrative. This story comes in three parts. The first part focuses on the John Travolta character, and he has to take out his boss's wife, a character who was established in the previous conversation between Travolta and Jackson in a seemingly inconsequential bit of dialogue. The wife is played by Uma Thurman, and I can honestly say that this is the first time I've really enjoyed John Travolta and Uma Thurman's acting, and I think it's because of how natural the dialogue is. The same can be said for Bruce Willis. who plays the prizefighter who features in the second part of the story. And the last part focuses on Samuel L. Jackson's character, and it's important to note that Jackson's story comes last in the movie, even though in the chronology of what's happening, it occurs close to the beginning. But the movie is told out of order. Why? Because Samuel L. Jackson's story pretty much sums up the movie, and so it kind of has to go last. So they put it last. All of these characters are faced with a choice at some point, and it's the choice that they make that really defines their character. And even though the dialogue that they're saying sets up their character very nicely, it's the choice that they make without usually saying any words that really tells the story of the characters. The way that the story is told is truly fascinating, but not just because of the brilliantly crafted dialogue, but also because of everything that the dialogue is not saying, but rather showing us. And yet, the story could not stand alone without the dialogue. It needs the dialogue even though it is not driven by the dialogue. How Tarantino accomplished this is a mystery, but it's brilliant. Obviously, I came out of this viewing with a much more favorable opinion of this movie than I did 6 or 7 years ago. I imagine that this is a movie that I'm going to enjoy more with each viewing, and on the worth meter, I would give this a solid worth owning. Tarantino is brilliant, the movie is brilliant, and the fuss for both of them is definitely merited. And that does it for this review. Next time we'll be looking at the realistic crime drama, The French Connection. See you then.